All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Jackman Radio. I'm your host, Eric Jackman, and I'm excited to be back with you here on Friday, August 30th, right on the eve of September. And September, of course, is primary season here in New Hampshire for our politics. So I'm very excited to be joined by my friend, Bill Hamlen. He is running for the 2nd Congressional District in New Hampshire in the Republican primary. Bill, thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Eric. I
Yeah,
really appreciate it.
Yeah, good to have you here. So I wanted to have you on and just, introduce you to my audience and, have you tell a little bit about yourself and why you decided to run for Congress and, what you feel you bring to this race that sets you apart from the other candidates.
Sure. Let me just start by giving you some very simple, basic background. Um, I was raised in a very middle-class home. My father was a chemist, and my mother was a nurse. I was raised Catholic. I was an altar boy, and I'm an Eagle Scout. When I was in high school, my first real job was working on a farm. I learned how to drive tractors, how to bale hay, how to back up a trailer with 3 hitches on it. I took care of a couple of cows. I mean, a herd of cows, a couple of horses. And I learned all about taking care of horses. And, for a kid in high school, it was kind of like a dream job. I really, really loved that. And I worked after school during my summers. And, it's funny, when the hay was ripe, we would get 2 cuts, typically one early season, one later in the season. When the hay was ready, you really had to harvest it. Otherwise, like, rain might come. So some weeks we would work 65 hours a week, 69, I think was the biggest week. And I remember that because I was getting paid minimum wage and up to 40 hours. After 40 hours, I got time and a half. And after 60 hours, I got double time. And so I was always looking forward to those weeks where we would work over 60 hours. And when I was in high school, I did a survival course called National Outdoor Leadership School in Wyoming. And on that course, I think it was 15, I heard about a college that had the best outing club in the country, and that was Dartmouth College. And I heard that here's this school that has the best outing club in the country and the most loyal alumni. And that was Dartmouth College, and I was lucky enough to get in. So at age 18, I packed my bags. I headed to the Upper Valley, and I fell in love with New Hampshire. And, it's funny, after college, I headed to New York, where I met my wife, Rowena, who'd been married 28 years. We've got 2 daughters, 20 and 22. For me, Dartmouth has this motto. I don't know where it came from. I don't take responsibility for it, but that maybe it was a slick marketing team that came up with it. But that Dartmouth is a base camp to the world. I think they're trying to bring in more international students up into the sticks up here, and so they described Dartmouth as the base camp to the world. And for me, this was very true. I left base camp. I traveled the world, met my wife, raised a family, lived the American dream. And when it was time to settle down, we came back to base camp. So that may be a motto for many people, but for us, it was part of our life experience. And so that's kind of the macro view. That's what brings me back here. I would only add the footnote that at Dartmouth, I studied economics, and I took a course as part of economics in agribusiness. And that course in agribusiness led to a job at a grain firm. And that was 1983. And that was the time that Trading Places came out. And here I am at a grain firm learning about commodities. Trading Places came out. And, all the pieces fit in place for me. In particular, I can tell you what I liked about Commodities were the people were very down to earth. It was a grain trading firm, but it was something I learned that held true throughout my commodity career is, in commodities, you've got people that are, commodities are those things like metals, grains, energy, oil. But it's a very, very physical business. You've got warehouses, you've got trucks, you've got ships, you've got inspectors, you've got people trading. And ultimately, I ended up as a oil trader. But even within the oil trading sector, there are a lot of people that come from shipping. A lot of people come from trucking. people come from Merchant Marine. And so it's an eclectic group of people from all over. It's not your typical Wall Street kind of milieu. And that is something that attracted me to the industry, or really the people. It's hard work. It's a lot of risk. It's very stressful. But when you're doing it with good, down-to-earth people that are of a similar, like-minded nature, it made it all easier. And so, so I went straight from, Dartmouth economics. You can connect the dots into my career in commodities. And so that's kind of a macro picture.
Right. And obviously in that world, I know when we spoke before, it had you on other parts of the globe outside of America. So that probably, I would assume, was your first time kind of going all around the world. Or did you travel much when you were a kid? Or was that like really kind of your entry into, I guess you could say, international relations and learning other cultures and how other people do business around the world, which can help you be, when you're in Congress for sure.
That's a good question. It hasn't come up in quite some time, but my father worked for General Electric and then eventually for ExxonMobil. And, but he did business overseas quite often. And my parents would, even 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, if he had a trip overseas, they would take me out of school and drag my little sister and I along with him. And, and it was a business trip, but we would get dragged around to different places. So I had a, very early on, I think it was accidental, a travel bug. But it's something, my wife is from the Philippines, and she also had her mother and father ran a travel agency. So they grew up traveling. I kind of grew up traveling. And it's one of the early commonalities that we bonded over was our love of, hopping on a plane and going anywhere. And so travel has been a big part of our lives forever, really. And my career trading overseas, kind of, we were well suited to it. One of the things I learned is that the universe pays a premium to people that, when I was, I think, 27, I'm at a commodity firm downtown Wall Street, and my boss came over to the desk and he said, "We need someone that's willing to go to," and I raised my hand before he even finished. And
Afghanistan.
Yeah, I know. Well, it was a bit of a risk, but it's a good story. And I was off to Singapore, and it was supposed to be for 2 weeks, but I had a mentor there that invited me to stay on, and I ended up spending a year there working, and really enjoyed Singapore. And as part of that job, as I mentioned, he was a mentor. He's still one of my best friends. He would say, if you're going to do business in Bangkok, go on a Friday, fly up Friday morning, spend the weekend, enjoy yourself. And the same would go for Kuala Lumpur or Manila, or anywhere. And I had eventually I had another boss like that who, when I lived in London, who a lot of people that live or travel overseas share a common curiosity about travel, and they self-select for other people that enjoy it. And so I had some mentors that kind of helped feed my curiosity about traveling. Yeah. So, and that ultimately is, just to finish that, being an international commodity trader, for someone that loves traveling and loves dealing with other cultures and loves meeting people and loves learning about other cultures, it's a wonderful place where they intersect. It's culture meets commodities meets people. And so that was a big part of my life, and something my wife and I shared in common.
Yeah, that's cool. It's a real way to get a slice of life in other cultures and how other people live, because I think too often a lot of people's views of other countries and other parts of the world can be very narrow and even a little bastardized when they're getting that information just from the media or TV and they haven't been there. And I always say, go travel, go out and meet people in other parts of the world. That way you'll be less inclined to want to support an invasion of their country if that happens, if your government's so inclined to do that. So for people who might not know what a commodity trader does, if you just want to give me like a snapshot of what like a typical day for you look like when you were doing that, and how you feel the skills that you got from that and the lessons you learned could make you a good member of Congress.
Sure. The one of the mentors that I mentioned, when he was training, and this is a value he instilled, um, he would advise us pick up the newspaper, read the newspaper, and find articles that affect the commodity prices. And at first you think that sounds a bit odd, um, but you would look through the newspaper and you'd find current events in different things in different parts of the world that would often affect commodity prices. And he would, it's kind of a fun little quirk, but commodities really are, it's where geopolitics and supply and demand, and I studied economics modified with geography. Geography is defined as the intersection of man and the planet and the land. And so a background in geography and a love of geography is very helpful in commodity trading. So if we're looking at, say, me when I was in Singapore at one point trading oil, you really need to know all your regional geopolitics, what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in India, what's going on in China, how is demand going. At one point I was supplying fuel to parts of East Africa, and so I got to understand, say, in Kenya or Tanzania or Mozambique or some of the islands, what is their base load of demand of energy supply? Is it hydro? Is it and how is the economy growing relative to the base load of demand? A good example would be Kenya, where they had some hydropower, they had some existing plants, they had some wind farms. In fact, they had some geothermal, and their economy was growing at a certain pace that we predicted that they were going to need to continue to import extra fuel to meet their power demands. And but so we were looking in a market like that, I might be looking 1 to 2 years into the future to see what we would make projections on what they might need, and what is the political environment. And that's just a tiny little blot of macro Asian demand. But to your question, that would be the type of thing I would do often, is analyzing what countries might need, or how is China's growth coming.
Yeah.
I was in Singapore in 1989. I'll never forget this. The Chinese energy minister was speaking at an event, and at the time, China was a net exporter of oil in 1989, and he said, "One of these days, mark my words, we will become a net importer." you know, and I feel like I was there at a particular moment in time when you go back to 1989 and where China went from there into the future. But so we would be studying, macroeconomic trends. The Taiwanese would be, they built a giant petrochemical and refining complex that was bigger than what they needed. And there were some naysayers that said, "Oh, this is way bigger than what Taiwan needed." Well, I did some simple calculations, and we realized within 5 years they were consuming everything that they produced. So initially it was an export facility, but eventually it met their domestic needs. So you kind of get used to looking at macro trends and analyzing the supply demand in a lot of countries, and trying to come up with predictions on where they're going to be in the future.
And you probably want to pay attention to their government and their leadership and the ruling party, and that's all tied into energy policy, of course. And then access to that country. What are the restrictions on it? Are there other countries that have sanctioned them? That comes up a lot with Russia and Germany, like with gas and stuff. So
one of my favorite stories, I'll make it quick. I have an old colleague. He was in Taipei in Taiwan, and this is maybe the early 90s. And he was trying to sell some low sulfur fuel oil from Indonesia. And at the time, they were burning high sulfur fuel that was producing a lot of pollution. And he was on his way to a meeting, and he got stuck in a giant environmental protest. and he was late for the meeting. And he went to the meeting and he offered to sell them this, very clean, low sulfur fuel oil. And they said, no, it's too expensive. We're not going to buy it. And then on his way back to the hotel, he got stuck in another giant environmental protest. And he realized they would eventually buy it because it was at a point in time where the people were fed up with the pollution and they'd reached a breaking point. And so there were riots in the streets and giant protests. And he made a prediction that they would. And a couple of weeks later, they called and they wanted to buy the very low sulfur fuel oil. But it was a great example of where even, of where politics, pollution meet shifting demand patterns. And you see that everywhere all the time. I mean, particularly even today with our green energy, it is the intersection of local politics, macro trends, and governments meet people. And what do the people really want relative to what the governments want? And so within the sphere of the world of energy, this is playing out all the time. I think I told you when we met briefly, maybe I didn't, that in 1977, my father drove me to school in an electric vehicle. We had one of the first electric vehicles in New Jersey. And he was working on a program to build electric vehicles for Exxon. His specialty was batteries, lithium batteries. In fact, that's what he did his thesis on. And I say that because energy policy has been dinner time conversation my entire life. That's what we talk about at dinner.
Yeah.
And, so it's kind of like been in my DNA. And, I think a lot of young people don't understand, or it's easy to not appreciate where we are right now. The smog we had in California, or New York for that matter, in the 70s and 80s. I remember going into New York City and you'd look over the giant pollution clouds coming in from New Jersey. Well, we've made massive progress, whether it's in New Jersey, New York City, Boston, or LA, from where we were just in the 70s and 80s. And that a lot of that was reducing nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide. Do you remember acid rain? That was all caused by sulfur dioxide. So we've eliminated tremendous amounts of pollutants. And I think it's so easy to latch onto the bad stories that people forget about the good stories. The good stories are the gasoline that goes into your car or the diesel that goes into your vehicle right now are infinitely cleaner than what we were using, just 30, 40, 50 years ago. So we've made huge progress. And you know what? I think the world is full of so much bad news that I love to find good stories.
We need we call those white pills and big W's, big wins, big victories. So in your travels, running on this campaign, going all around New Hampshire in our 2nd district, what have you found has been like the top 2 or 3 issues that is like on the mind of voters that you consistently hear?
Sure. Well, first of all, just going back to our beginning conversation, I will start by finishing a question I think you asked, and why am I running? And one of the reasons is, service has been part of my life. I'm an Eagle Scout. When I lived in Manhattan, I tutored up in East Harlem. I would work on trading commodities all day long, but that was nothing compared to tutoring on Monday nights up in Harlem. It was so out of my normal skill set that was much harder. And I hadn't had children yet, so it was all a learning experience for me. But I would bore you to tears with all the different types of service I've done. I think I mentioned I'm on the board of a microfinance organization in Fiji. So for me, part of running for office is just a continuation of the service that has been a part of my life forever. And I think it's easy to forget that running for office really is about service. And so that's something that's very important to me. As far as the 2nd Congressional District goes, I have been up and down the state from Canada down to the Mass border, speaking to people. I'm really big on going into gas stations, going into tire shops, going into diners, going to general stores, and talking to people. And one of the things I've learned, not to sound weird about it, but it's like there's this, when you go in and tell people I'm running for office, this is my name, and this is what I'm doing, it's like opening this weird gate where people want to tell you about their life stories, and they want to tell you what they care about, and they want to tell you different experiences, what means a lot to them, particularly in New Hampshire, like nowhere else. I was at a garage in northern Grafton County, two guys sitting in there. I walked in, knocked on the door, told them who I am, and both of them had met Kelly Ayotte twice. Both of them had met Chuck Morris twice, and we had a 30 to 40-minute conversation about New Hampshire politics and who they liked and why. And this is in the middle of nowhere and a very quiet road in northern Grafton County. And that's what you meet up here. And then, but now to answer your question, people care about inflation. More than that, I think they care about the cost of living. Inflation's come down a little bit, but the cost of living hasn't come down at all. In fact, that's the biggest issue. But right behind it is the border. We are not, we're very lucky up here. I think we're insulated in many ways from the turmoil in the rest of the country, but it's coming across our border now. The number of apprehensions at the northern border is more, 15 to 19,000. It's more than we've had in the last dozen years altogether. So it's on our doorstep, and people feel it now. On the southern border, we have more drugs coming up from Massachusetts, from Lowell, Mass, than ever before into Manchester. People are talking about that. Those are the two big issues that people care about. And, there are other issues, but I can tell you they drop off pretty quick. Housing would be the next issue. But cost of living, the border are far and away the two biggest issues.
Those are just speaking, and I told you when we first met, for me personally, cost of living, the dollar just does not go as far as it did even a couple of years ago. It's insane, and just everyday working people are feeling that. So I'm sure that will probably be one of your top priorities if you get in there to Congress. So just as far as like making personal relationships with people across the aisle or that you don't agree with, what do you think you offer in that way of reaching out a hand across the aisle and being willing to put aside differences on minutia and aligning with people where you have really big agreement?
Okay, let me make sure I cover this because there's a few points in there that I think are really important to me. But first and foremost, my entire career was spent dealing with potential, let's just call them adversaries. If you're trying to get a deal done in commodities, if you're not getting a deal done with an adversary, you're sitting in your desk alone, right?
Right.
And so fundamental to my experience has been dealing with adversaries or counterparties, let's just call them, that you've got opposite goals. They want the highest price, you want the lowest price. You have to find a way to meet in the middle. And oftentimes that might be on things you don't think about: timing, specs, compromise, building a consensus on what works for both parties. So getting deals done and building consensus is something that I've been doing my entire life. That's what a good trader is good at. So I believe, I really think I bring a unique life experience in getting deals done that is rare in Washington. And I've dealt with countries like, Mexico. I've done a lot of business in the Middle East. I've done a lot of business in Asia with people from, vastly different cultures, and figured out how to get deals done with adversaries that come from different cultures. In fact, that's what I enjoyed doing. That's what I loved about what I did. But then when it comes to, back here, it's funny. Someone asked me one day about the rancor in Washington and how do you deal with it? How would you deal with it? And it just hit me. I've got two parents. They're 94. They're still alive. And I've been married for 28 years, and I've got two daughters, 20 and 22. At the end of the day, I need to come home and look them in the eye and do the responsible thing. And I can tell you that being married for 28 years involves a lot of consensus building and compromise and getting along. And I think people forget that we need more of that. And now, as far as but taking it to the political level, it's something we talked about. But uh, our food systems. I was interviewed at a radio station recently, and obviously I'm a Republican and I'm conservative, and this guy wasn't. He was a lifelong Democrat, and we started talking about food and about good quality grass-fed beef. And it turns out he made his own sourdough bread, and we were talking about this before the interview. And he said to me, he said, "Wow, you sound a lot like a Democrat." And I laughed. I said, "So do you think what you got a monopoly on caring about the quality of your food systems?" And I said, "Oh, my conservative friends care just as much about it." And I think it's almost a funny thing that we live in such a polarized world that he would think that only people within his silo care about the quality of their food, that he would assume that maybe
Right.
didn't. And so I love finding areas like that where we have shared values. And I think building consensus. And by the end of it, by the way, I'm looking forward to having him over for dinner one night and cooking food.
Yeah.
And he's a good friend of a friend. And that is part of kind of who I am, is finding commonality with other people that might be on the other side of the political spectrum, but you find things you agree with, and you get along on. I almost as a hobby would find issues where I agree with my friends that might be on the other side of the political spectrum. One of my donors to my campaign, lifelong Democrat, but he said, "Bill, good luck and do me a favor, close that border."
Yeah.
And I hear that from a lot of friends that have been either lifelong independents or possibly Democrats that actually agree. And another thing, because it is a big can of worms talking about building consensus. Someone asked me recently, how are you, if you win the primary, how are you going to win the general election? And I almost find it funny because I said, inflation and the cost of living doesn't just affect Republicans. It affects independents and it affects Democrats. There's some major issues like cost of living and inflation and the border that don't just affect Republicans. And I think that it's an area where there is much more common ground. In 1984, Ronald Reagan won Massachusetts in his second term. The entire state was red. And that was because Ronald Reagan, they call them Reagan Democrats. There are Democrats in Massachusetts, just south of the border, right? That were so fed up with the Democratic policies that they voted in Ronald Reagan in a landslide. And I think when you look at the 2016 election, Trump carried a lot of independents. So, I refer to them as Trump independents and Reagan Democrats. These are the type of people that whose vote I'll be looking for come the general election. And as I said, there's a lot of issues. Cost of living doesn't just affect Republicans; it affects everybody. So I think there's issues like that we can win on all day long. There's a lot of I think there's a lot of problems out there right now that we're looking for solutions.
Yeah, and I know we touched on this, and I've felt this over the last year and a half. There's been some great pushback against like the woke ESG, corporate governance, DEI stuff, and that men and women's sports is all over the place. It's a hot potato. But yeah, can you speak a little bit about your recent? You were just part of a forum or a speech with a very well-known female athlete.
Sure. Well, I'll give you some quick background. My daughter, I graduated from Dartmouth in 1984. My daughter was in the class of 2024. When she had a really good senior year in high school of swimming. So she was invited on. She wasn't recruited to Dartmouth, but she got into Dartmouth all on her own and then was invited to join the swim team. And it's a long story. I'll make the short version. Dartmouth cut back on recruited athletes and they tried to cancel the swim team. Me and another group of either parents, concerned parents, or former swimmers, we united together. We built an organization. We got the team back on a Title IX lawsuit. And in that process, I learned a lot about Title IX. And then, so we got the team back. At some point, after once the team was back, my daughter was voted to be the team captain. And as I tell you, as her father, I was so proud. It was such a lifelong achievement. I mean, to be a Division I varsity athlete is tough. To be a Division I varsity swimmer is really tough. To be the captain of that team, it's a lifetime achievement. But after we got the team back, her team had to go swim against the UPenn in the Ivy League championships, and she didn't race directly, but her team raced against Leah Thomas from Penn. And, she begged me not to say anything. I'm a bit of an activist, as you might tell. And so we were bullied into silence. We had to sit there quietly to watch this thing happen. So when Riley Gaines was speaking at the New Hampshire Federation of Republican Women event, I was one of the introductory speakers. There were a few of us ahead of time. So I told a wonderful story about my daughter's swimming career and what we went through. And afterwards, my daughter Izzy spoke to Riley Gaines, and they kind of compared notes on what they'd been through. And I think at that point, I didn't want to crowd her. They were just chatting, but I gave them their space, and then I came over, and I overheard my daughter telling Riley what she went through, that the coach had told them, if you say anything, you'll be kicked off the team. We will ruin your life. We will, you'll be canceled. And I think she didn't tell me because she knew earlier how upset I would be and how angry I'd be. And so to me, it was a real window into what goes on behind closed doors. Kids that are bullied like that, they're afraid to tell their parents at times because they know, a guy like me is going to march right in there and read the riot act to the coach. And so they're scared to say, they're afraid to say anything in protest, but they're even afraid to tell their parents. And for me, it was an eye-opening experience. And so I'm leading the charge to defend these kids against that. And I think that event, that experience, it's a metaphor for so many other things that we are going on in our schools.
It is.
I was down in Keene. I saw a giant Trump banner in someone's yard. I had a little bit of a cushion before I went to an event, so I pulled in the driveway, knocked on the door, introduced myself, said hi. And the mother and the father were really wonderful people. If I was you, I could explain how wonderful they are in a Trump accent, but I can't do it.
But they were very fine people. These were great people. They had my banner, so obviously they like me. Okay, they don't like Kamala, they like me.
Yeah. So they had this big Trump banner, and their experience was wonderful because the reason they had that banner in their front yard is because there was someone at their school shoving a woke agenda down their son's throat, and they were active. I don't know how they found out, but they went in and they were exposed to the content that their child was being forced to watch, and it made them activists. That's why they said they'd had enough. That's why they put the Trump banner up. And I think that's part of the awakening that's happening right now. And I think some of that started during COVID when parents started to get exposed to what was going on. They were overhearing what's going on in our schools. And so I think in the wake of that, there's a lot of parents that are, I hear it. I go to, in New Hampshire, up and down the district, I go to these Republican meetings, and every third or fourth meeting, I'll hear a story. I'm the invited speaker, but I have to, I listen to it's their normal monthly meeting. Mm-hmm. There'll be a story of some parent that comes to their local Republican committee. They're afraid to speak up, or maybe it's a teacher in the school, and they're afraid to complain. So you know what? Who they speak to? They speak to their local Republican rep, either the rep to Concord or someone that they know in office, and they ask them to fight back for them. So what I tell some of these, grassroots Republican workers, they are on the front lines of the culture wars because they're the ones that parents turn to. And then now I hear stories of parents getting active in the PTAs. I know when my wife and I were raising our daughters, we were always, several times a year invited into the classroom. It's kind of a normal thing. But I think, maybe this COVID woke people up, and maybe the woke agenda, the Democrats just pushed it too hard, particularly with this swimming thing. And we've reached a breaking point where people are pushing back.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Bill. And I was really pretty quiet about all this stuff for a while too, because I was afraid of that, like getting labeled something or being called, a bigot or this phobe and that phobe, and you're this and you're that. But you know what, man? Everyday normal people, we do have to push back loudly against that silliness, because that's how we impact change, and that's how we can ultimately stamp out this BS happening. Like a guy in a woman's locker. Let's just call it what it is. It's a guy in a woman's locker room. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I can tell you, Riley, she's such a warrior and a role model for young women everywhere. But she did tell a story of being in that locker room. Putting on a racing suit takes 10 to 20 minutes because it's really tight and they're not very flexible. They're made for fast swimming, but you don't pull it on like a
No.
yeah. It takes a while, and they were in the locker room with a fully functioning male.
Oh yeah.
6'5", and it's just terrifying. I never want to dream.
What guy would want his daughter in there in that situation? Nobody.
Though I will say this, and I preach this loud and clear. The good news is, Gallup did a poll in 2021. 62% of Americans agreed with this. By 2023, 69% of Americans agreed with us. After the Olympics, it's probably 72%. And so it's one of those few issues where independents completely agree with conservatives and Republicans that they pushed it too far. I cannot think of another issue where independents agree with Republicans so completely. And so it's a wonderful issue. And like I said, I tell Republicans in New Hampshire that are running for office at any office level, it's God's gift to Republicans right now is to campaign on that issue.
Oh, it's a winning issue. And then I gotta plug Bud Light here, because you know what, Bill? We're allowed to drink Bud Light again. Okay, they got rid of Dylan, that guy running around in the dress with all the Bud Lights, and Bud Light lost $1 billion in their company. And they fired everybody, and now they got Shane Gillis. He's a great comedian. He's a good friend of mine. He does a good Trump impression, and we're drinking Bud Light again, Bill. We are. But that case in point with Bud Light, I mean, look what happened, man. They had that. They had the trans influencer as the face of their company, and it tanked. They lost over $1 billion in the value of their company. So market forces, man. We the people, we actually do have power in our buying power, and like what you're talking about in activism and getting like-minded citizens together.
I believe I just saw the headlines, but I think Harley Davidson, someone in marketing there, you followed it. I didn't. I just saw that they did something monumentally stupid. The market value tanked, and then they had to roll back on it. You talk about the woke agenda. I just think they pushed this thing a little too far, thinking everyone was on their side,
or they'd stay quiet.
Yeah, I like to think it's like 1980 with the Reagan Revolution, that they pushed their hand too hard, and the pendulum is ready to swing back.
It is swinging back, and I'm definitely seeing it and hearing it. And I worked at a university in higher ed for 5 years. And my last year there, millennials, we have a term we call clown world. You ever heard that, Bill?
I have heard that term.
You've heard full clown world?
Yes.
They just went full clown world with it. And it just, on my way out the door there, it was pretty insufferable. So I'm very hopeful that, all avenues and sectors of our life that wokeness and that nonsense is being pushed out. So, we'll be keeping an eye on it.
I can tell you, having friends in Singapore, in Japan, in Korea, they're laughing at us. They think we've lost our minds.
Yeah.
But it's, on the other hand, in Australia, in the UK, in Canada right now, some of our historic allies are suffering their own issues. I read about the stuff that's going on in the UK right now. It's terrifying. It is. George Orwell predicted some of this stuff.
It's happening. It's playing out before our very eyes. You can get arrested for a social media post, and there's plenty of people and entities that want that here in America. They're pushing for that, and they want to snuff out speech and freedom of expression, and the First Amendment protects the things you don't want to hear. That's why we have it.
Yeah, well, that's another thing we learned during the pandemic, that they would censor, and and Mark Zuckerberg's finally seen the light. Yeah.
Isn't that unbelievable? The guy's finally admitting, oh, yeah, I did collude with the government to silence voices and shut out dissent and, make sure that an environment was created where anyone who ran against the stream was called crazy and their voice was silenced.
Yeah. Well, I think, I know for me and a lot of my friends, the pandemic was a bit of a wake-up call. And we saw what they would do. And certainly when it comes to the First Amendment, but also the Second Amendment, it's made me more of a staunch defender of the Second Amendment because I saw what they would do with the First Amendment, given the chance. And once you've seen them reveal their hand, you have to double down, particularly on free speech in the Second Amendment.
Yeah. I think about the Hunter laptop story. They censored the New York Post, one of the longest running papers in America. I know it's kind of a rag and it's a little gossipy. It's one of Trump's favorite papers for sure. He's had a long relationship with him.
It's funny. I have a friend. I referred Merlin, same by name, lifelong Democrat. And one day I forget the context of the conversation, and he said, but he grew up in New Jersey. He said, yeah, like most people, first thing I do in the morning, I open the computer, have some coffee, I check the New York Post.
Hell yeah.
And they don't have a firewall. They're really quite generous. Thank God, because there's so many other comparable newspapers have a firewall.
Oh, the paywall. The New
York Post is still giving, and that what they did with the Hunter laptop was horrible. But I'm so glad for the New York Post.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you, the Post. Yeah, so basically, same here. I read every day. I read the Post. I read The Guardian, I read Politico, The Independent out of England, and then I got to plug a great platform on Substack called House and Habit, who I guest write for occasionally. This awesome gal named Jessica Reed Krause. I met her during my time working for RFK's campaign, and she's doing circles around legacy media with her Substack. She has close to 400,000 subscribers, and she is now embedded in traveling with Trump's campaign and getting behind the scenes and just bringing the campaign right to the people with no corporate media filter. So,
fantastic. And how about Elon Musk? I mean, I get, because I was, an energy trader, through Twitter, through X, pardon me, I get some extraordinary research for free.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all in one source, and I don't have to check 10 different sources. It's all there. There's a guy, I'll just plug him, Josh Young at Bison, does some wonderful work. This guy, Harris Kupperman. You follow a couple key aggregators.
Right.
And you don't need to read the newspaper, at least, or any type of energy-focused thing, because I get it all straight from them on X. It's really made my life easier.
Yeah, no, I mean, Elon took over Twitter and he made it based again. He brought back, Alex Jones. He brought back all the no accounts, that they're not supposed to be on there. And even if you don't agree with what they're saying, or even if they're saying reprehensible and vile things, they should be allowed to say it, and we should talk about it. It should be out there in the open in the public square.
Yeah. Imagine how much different the information flow would have been during the pandemic if X was liberated that whole time.
Right. Yeah. Oh my God. We all would have been able to get horse paste, Bill. No problem. We could get the hydroxychloroquine in the horse paste. Hey man, I told you when I got COVID, I took ivermectin, man, and I felt better right quick.
Oh yeah. You and Joe Rogan.
Yeah. Rogan was the grandfather, the granddaddy of the horse paste. So I said, if Joe Rogan did it, he's a healthy guy. I can do it. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Well,
but
I don't know if we covered that when I was when we met initially. My wife and I had been through the SARS pandemic in Singapore, and we left at the time. We transferred to the UK just coincidentally as it got worse, but that had a 30% mortality rate. That was terrifying. Um, if the malls were empty, if you were going down an escalator and someone sneezed anywhere with earshot, you ran the other way. It was absolutely terrifying. We had so when this last pandemic hit, we still had Mickey Mouse masks left over in our medicine cabinet from the SARS pandemic. So we were, I think, mentally, emotionally, we were probably 2 to 3 months ahead of most Americans in preparing for it and anticipating what to expect. And so I'm fortunate that we had been through it, and so I think we were prepared in many different ways.
yeah, you didn't feel totally like the rug pulled out from under you like so many people. And yeah, what a wild time that was. That was a real Maskoff moment, no pun intended, for a lot of people and entities. And you look back on how cartoonish some of the people in the press were about it, and compared to what they're saying now, like Cuomo there when he was on CNN, he was a real bully and a real jackass to people who didn't want to get vaccinated or who weren't prescribing to the mainstream narrative. And then uh, he, obviously he's out from CNN and he's now at News Nation. But there's been some great podcasts he's been on where he took some lashings, as he should. So I feel like there's a, just like we talked about with the woke stuff, there's great pushback against the tyranny from, I call COVID the flu world order. That's what my brother and I call it. It was this Alex Jones style. It was flu world order, Bill. Okay, it was high tech medical tyranny, and I'm not going to stand for it because I had relatives at the Alamo. Infowars.com. There's pushback against it, and I mean Rand Paul was right on the money the whole time with it about it, and it really was mostly voices on the right who took a stand against it. I'm kind of hard pressed to think about an icon or anyone on the left who really had some balls and did or said anything about it. So,
Well, if there's a silver lining to the whole thing, and look, it's just 2024. There's a long arc to history, and I think that pandemic. If you go back to the Spanish flu, World War I, the Spanish flu, a lot of that history was buried because it was such a dark period that by the time the Roaring '20s came along, people wanted to forget it. But part of the Roaring '20s was this rebirth of family values. I remember during the pandemic reading about as they emerged from the Spanish flu pandemic, but people ate at home more. There was a return to family values. There was the Roaring '20s. There was a euphoria, a post-crisis euphoria. And I think that we in 2024, things seem to happen a little bit faster now due to social media, due to the information flow. But I think that it's too early to say whether the counterculture pendulum swing, I don't think it's done yet, because I think that pandemic woke people up to
it
how
sure
far
did.
the left would go. And so when I talk about that 2021 through 2023 Gallup poll about parents or people against trans boys swimming in women's sports or boys being in women's locker rooms,
Yeah.
these stats are moving fast. Rarely do you see a social statistic move that quickly. Normally, they're just moving in tiny increments. To me, that's an indicative statistic on the strength of the pendulum swing that is kind of coming our way. So, like I said, I think we're right now optimistically on verge of a Reagan-esque revolution, of a turn. When you look at the 70s, we had heroin, we had New York City bankrupt, we had hostages in Iran, we had soaring inflation. It was hard to buy a home because interest rates were, I remember, 12, 13, 14% at one point, mortgage rates. It was inconceivable. And then we had the Reagan Revolution, and by the mid 90s, we had a balanced budget when Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House. It was the only time in my lifetime when we had a slight surplus. And that was due to the
Wow.
arc of that whole Reagan Revolution. So
that's unfathomable for me to think about, because what are we now, close to 40 trillion in the hole?
yeah.
The federal debt.
And now, if you look at it in historic terms, the numbers are so large that it's hard to fathom. There's easier ways to look at it. If you look at spending as a percentage of GDP, and you look at revenue as a percentage of GDP, then you can get kind of flat lines as opposed to these lines that just keep going up and they look inconceivable. But when you look at the gap between spending and revenue as a percentage of GDP, it was very similar in the 1970s, but by the 1990s we'd closed that gap. So I have friends that have given up, and I always tell them, I'm like, look, we've faced bad times before.
We've been there before,
and we've turned it around. So I'm an optimist. I think we can turn it around.
Could we get to a place, Bill, where we don't spend more than we take in, like anyone runs their household to keep your damn household afloat? You don't spend more than you take in.
One of my favorite historic quotes is Milton Friedman once said, "Never in the history of mankind has inflation been caused by consumer spending. It has always been a function of government overspending." So we don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem right now. And, one of my goals when I go to Washington is to get right now, just free spending, and then worry about getting the pork out. We can then haggle over where the cuts might take place. But number one thing I would do is absolutely free spending. And if we free spending, revenue will continue to tick up. The historic arc of inflation says it will, unfortunately, but it's not always bad.
Where are you, Bill, on the Federal Reserve? What do you think? Get rid of it? Full audit? What's your posture on the Fed?
Well, back to and this is almost funny, back to the 1990s when we had a budget surplus. I've got friends, I wasn't a bond trader, but I have friends that were bond traders, and they were worried that suddenly we're going to pay off our debt and there wouldn't be treasury bills and treasury bonds because we could pay off our debt. So they were legitimately worried about, oh my God, what happens if we pay off our debts? And so when it comes to the Federal Reserve and that question, because I know it's a bit of a third rail, my view on that is, how about we get back to a point where we have to worry about what we're going to do about bonds and bills and government debt. And that is by getting those two lines back together again, like we did in the 1990s. And then we can talk about how much do we really need the Federal Reserve.
Do you think it's fair to call it a private cartel like Ron Paul does?
Yeah, you know what? I like Ron Paul on most issues, and I don't disagree with him on that issue. But I think it is a bit of a third rail for some people. And I've met a number of people up here in New Hampshire. I mean, people take the politics very, very seriously.
We got a thing called the Free State Project, Bill. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
sure you've met many very nice, very fine people. Very fine people.
Hey, I love that they've got a website.
Oh, we lose connection there with Bill. Of course, we're right when we're talking about the Federal Reserve. So it looks like his connection dropped there, but hopefully we can get him back here. But I'll take some of your questions, guys, while we're waiting for Bill to come back. Let's see. I know we got some at the start here. So Big John asked, "Yo, Eric, I need to find out, is there going to be any more of the Four Horsemen, or is that over and gone like hits from the bong?" So I went boating with Reed last month, and he's totally game to do some more Four Horsemen, and I've talked to Ryan, and he is too. It's just a matter of lining up our schedules and getting the time to do it. So we definitely will. We want to. I don't have a date or a timeline, but we will certainly want to do more episodes. So I'm just seeing if I can get Bill back here. He may have texted me. All right. Let's see what else we got for questions. Okay, so Bill looks like his laptop died, but he's getting it powered back up, and we'll get him back here shortly. Okay. So yeah, like I said, the Four Horsemen will ride again. We'll be back eventually. Yep, there's Bill. There he is.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you back. Bill, I'll tell you, the second we start talking about the Federal Reserve and Ron Paul and ivermectin and fighting the deep state, the feed gets cut. I don't think it's a coincidence, folks. Infowars.com.
Yeah, I'd moved location, and yeah, it drained faster than I expected.
Well,
But
drained
I would say the 101 Reasons to Move to New Hampshire, it is a Free State Projects site, but they have some wonderful attributes, such as, fourth grade math scores being some of the highest in the country, and wonderful reasons. I know they veer off course a little bit, but 101 Reasons to Move to New Hampshire is a fantastic checklist of the wonderful attributes of our state.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many amazing reasons to move here and to stay here. And I've been here since 1997. I moved up here from Massachusetts when I was in fourth grade. My dad moved. The five of us were a family of five. I got a brother, a sister, and my mom and dad. And I didn't like it at first, because I was in Mass for 10 years. That's all I ever knew. But I'll tell you, man, once we got settled in here, and it was pretty obvious how special of a place it is, how the culture, the people, how neighborly people are, how helpful everyone is. So those are our New Hampshire values that if you get down there to Washington, Bill, you got to bring them with you.
Well, I can tell you at the core of one of the reasons I'm running is just to protect and preserve our way of life up here. We've got the lowest crime rate, another 101 reasons, lowest burglary rate in the nation, highest quality of life over and over again. And particularly as the rest of the country gets worse, we're just holding our own up here. One of the reasons we have a housing crisis is because so many people want to come here. I really, truly believe we are so lucky. And because of this, my campaign, I have been driving to nooks and crannies where I might not have been before. But, 45 years ago when I was, almost 45 years ago when I first came to Dartmouth, I went cross-country skiing up in Coos, up in the northern. Dartmouth College has an old land grant. It's just a bunch of logging land up there, but it's just gorgeous back country. We are really blessed. And in the southern part of the state, down in Hillsborough, there's just so many beautiful little towns. It's extraordinary. I was up at Roby Farms, which is a place north of me, and the son, Mark Roby, took me for a ride up the Connecticut River on his little pontoon boat. And we saw, bald eagles flying overhead. There's places on the river where it could be 500 years ago. It's just so beautiful.
Right. Yeah, it's a special place. So I don't have any plans, of leaving here. I've been here 27 years, and it's a way of life. A lot of my friends, I went to Franklin Pierce and Ringe, and my very best friends who I'm still in touch with will always just say, man, those are magical 4 years of my life, and New Hampshire will always hold a special place in my heart. And when they come back and visit, it's, they're instantly brought back and reminded about how amazing it is here. And then, we talked about at dinner the other night, the access to the presidential primary. Like I said, I'm a kid, and all these guys running for president who you see on TV, they're now in your backyard, or they're at the Legion or the VFW, and they're campaigning. So we want to keep that first too. So obviously you'll be a fighter for the primary, keeping that first in the nation.
That brings up, I think I touched on it earlier, but it bears repeating. The most extraordinary thing to me about being on this campaign trail is how much people here care about politics. And they don't suffer fools. When you go in and you say, I'm running for office, they're ready with 5 questions. Where do you stand on this? Where do you stand on that? General stores, gas stations, everywhere I go, people care more deeply here because of that first in the nation thing. And so that's what makes, for me, running in New Hampshire, if you can, to represent this state, the people that are most serious about politics and politicians in the country, it would be an extraordinary achievement. It'd be certainly my lifetime achievement. So that I am really excited about this race. I really love the state, and I love the people up here. and we're all very lucky. I get the impression most people I know came here for the quality of life. Either they were born here and they appreciate it, or they came here from somewhere else, and they get that. Um, and so, there's a commonality of fighting to preserve what we have up here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I want to keep New Hampshire. We keep New Hampshire great, Bill. Okay, that's what we're going to do. So you got a debate coming up at New England College, right? That's coming up the first week of September. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about that, if they can attend, the details.
Oh,
All that.
sure. Gosh, I don't want to risk losing you again, but New England College is next Wednesday at 6 o'clock.
Okay.
The following evening is WMUR at 8 p.m. And they'll both be televised. It'll be very exciting. I'm looking forward to it. The primary is September 11th or 10th, pardon me.
10th.
I'm looking forward to the 11th, by the way. But the
Yeah.
primary is September 10th. And there's just a few days left, really, in the scheme of things. And several different polls have said over 50% of the likely voters are still undecided. So we're into it's going to be a hot, less than 2 weeks as I think voters engage with, the candidates. And so I think the New England College debate and the WMUR will be watched by all those people in New Hampshire that take their politics very seriously.
Yeah, those are going to be huge moments, Bill. Well, you are not talking to someone who's undecided. I'm decided, Bill, and right now I'm going to make huge news, and I'm endorsing you. I urge everybody to go vote for Bill in the primary. He's a cool guy. I've gotten to know him, done some research into him, like what I've seen, and I will be voting for you in the primary on September 10th. So I urge everybody who lives in New Hampshire's 2nd Congressional District, who listen to this podcast, to please, check Bill out, see where he is on the issues. His website is hamlenforcongress.com, HAMLENFOR Congress.com, and he's got a great website there. So before we log off here, Bill, I'll give you the last word, and make that pitch. Why do we got to send you to Washington?
Thank you, Eric, and thank you for plugging the website so I don't have to do it myself. Well, I can tell you this, by the way. The critical issues really are the border and the cost of living. And, the thing I feel so passionately about is if it takes 5 Army divisions to secure that border, I will do it. I will do whatever it takes. And the other thing I really am concerned about is the amount of drugs that are coming across that open border. The Chinese, they subsidize the price of the fentanyl precursors. They ship them to Mexico. The triads are working with the cartels to ship that here. It's killing people. More Americans have died since Joe Biden took office than Americans died in World War II. It's not, they have declared war on us, the Chinese in particular, with this fentanyl, and it is killing Americans. So we really need to secure that border. I lost a very close relative to an opioid overdose, and it's something that I can tell you I will fight harder than anyone else in Washington to secure that border. But beyond that, I really want to get government spending under control so that we can bring down inflation. And the last thing I'm really excited about is to take my expertise and understanding and my life experience within the energy sector to Washington. We're spending trillions of dollars on this Green New Deal, and we need a few people like me that know a lot about energy. No one can pull the wool over my eyes. We're spending trillions. I just want to make sure that we're spending it properly. I won't bore you anymore. I've got a bunch of really good ideas on what we can do, and it's not just about drill, baby, drill, but there's some other common sense things we can do that I don't think we're doing with regards to green energy, with solar, with access to the grid. I think the reason we haven't covered all the bases there is because we don't have people like me that understand the entire system. Right. A couple key issues that I happen to know a lot about that I'm really excited to take my expertise to Washington. And, up here, by the way, we have the 2nd highest electricity rates in the nation. One of the things Donald Trump has talked about is connecting Pennsylvania shale gas through New York State into New England. We need a strong leader that can get it done. The New York State killed 3 attempts at building pipelines to bring that shale gas to New England. Well, with a strong president in the backing and a good majority, we can get some very logical things like that done. So
yeah, and I mentioned nuclear to you before. I've done a 180 on that issue. I used to be a scaredy pants about it and believed all the fear mongering. And then Oliver Stone opened my eyes to nuclear power and the possibility and the potential. So I recommend everyone watch Nuclear Now, Oliver Stone's documentary.
I'm with you on that one. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that's Bill Hamlen, everybody. Bill, I really appreciate you coming on and hang out with me after I end the stream. But everyone, check out his website, see where he is on the issues. He's on X, Twitter, the artist formerly known as Twitter, X, and I'll read your account. It's it's just at Hamlen for Congress, HAMLEN, the number 4, and then Congress. So go check him out on X. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in to Jackman Radio again. You like this podcast, please click subscribe. Find us on all podcast platforms. And please consider financially supporting the channel. We're independent. We don't have any corporate money. We don't have the donors' money, Bill. I don't want their money. I don't need their money. Okay.
I'll get you some when I get to Washington.
Yeah. Get some money for Jackman Radio, would you? Get some from Washington for us. But yeah, it's patreon.com/Jackman Radio if you want to become a patron, $5-10 a month. So we appreciate your support and thank you for listening. And we will see you next time.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks. Thank you, Bill.